So, from the Father John Murphy Division 9, Plymouth of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and the town of Scituate, and the Scituate Easter Rising Monument Committee would like to welcome you to the 108th commemoration of the Easter Rising. And suffice to say, an event like this would never take place without a lot of people making it happen. So there's a number of folks to thank. First, we'd like to thank Father Matthew Connolly and Nancy DeCoste of St. Mary of the Nativity Parish, because they've been extraordinary as far as providing the venue and supporting this event. It was nice to go to Mass today because you opened up the bulletin and there is the flyer for the Easter Rising commemoration. We'd like to thank the Scituate Select Board and Maura Curran in particular, the chair. She's going to say a few words to you. But walking down Front Street and seeing the Irish flags and the American flags for Easter Rising, in honor of the Easter Rising, this is something that's happened almost every year since we've started commemorating this, and I dare say Scituate is the only city or town in Massachusetts to recognize the Easter Rising in this manner, and it's extraordinary, and it's a tribute to the town. We also would like to thank the Scituate DPW, who put those flags up and take those flags down. There are men who do that every year, and certainly we'd be remiss to not acknowledge their help. And also we'd like to thank Lorraine Devon from the Scituate Select Board, who has been also very supportive of this event, not just this year, but every year. I'd like to thank my brother, Bill Sullivan, who did the landscaping and cleaned up around the monument. One of the schedule of events is going to be the reading of the proclamation, and originally the plan was to read it from the podium, but after we adjourn here, all of you are welcome to go to the actual monument in Scituate Harbor next to the bandstand, where there is a granite monument with the words of the proclamation engraved upon it. And again, it's a credit to the town and to the generosity of people throughout Massachusetts that they donated to make this dream a reality. And I believe it's the only one of its kind in the entire United States. So we'll be reading the proclamation there at the monument afterwards. Also, I'd like to thank Brenda O'Connor, Siobhan Hunter, John Travers, and Mike Shirley, the members of the Scituate Easter Rising Monument Committee who helped put this all together. And especially Mike Shilling. The program you have before you is rather extraordinary. And Mike, despite leaving last Saturday with his wife and 2 young children to Ireland, was able to put this program together. And Brother John Travers was able to pick it up and have it here today. Also, I'd like to acknowledge all hard work done by Professor Catherine Shannon and the members of her panel that you're going to hear today, Tiffany Thompson, Catherine Neal, and a special thanks to Christian DuPont of the Burns Library. It is rather extraordinary to look at your brochure and see artifacts from over 100 years ago during the period when Ireland fought for its freedom, and then go up to the top of that piano there and see the actual artifacts. And it's a reminder that there were a lot of men and women who were responsible for Ireland having its freedom. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of State Representative Joe Moschino, and also want to acknowledge Lou Rizzo from Senator Patrick O'Connor's office. He had a Cal Ripken event that he had to go to today in Weymouth. He apologized for not being here. We were all set to say he's batting 100% because he's been here every other time. But Senator O'Connor has been a staunch supporter of all things Irish, not only in Scituate, but on the South Shore in general. Also, I want to thank Maureen Haiti for being here. She has been a great supporter, not just for this event, but also for the annual Briggs St. John Mass that we have in Cohasset every year. And just as a reminder, this year on October 6th at 2 o'clock at St. Anthony's is the 175th anniversary of this tragic shipwreck. The celebrant of that Mass is going to be Cardinal Sean O'Malley. And if you can make it to the Mass, I'd encourage you to do so. It commemorates the tragedy of 99 men, women, and children who were fleeing the Great Hunger. It made it all the way across the ocean on the St. John, only to hit the Grampus Ledge in a fierce nor'easter. And most of the people, the Irish on that ship, died. A few survived. But the 99 men, women, and children are honored by a Celtic cross in Cohasset Central Cemetery. And that cross was dedicated in 1914. And it is one of the first monuments anywhere in the world to commemorate an event that took place during the Great Hunger of Ireland. So in October, and you'll be hearing more about that, but the Father John Murphy Division has been commemorating this Mass every year for over 30 years. I also want to recognize Turlock McDonough and his wife Cara and their daughter. Turlock is the great-grandson of Thomas McDonough, one of the 7 signatories of the proclamation. And he's here with us today. And you know, you look at the names on that proclamation, and these men sacrificed everything, and they lost their lives as a result of endorsing that document, and they're fighting for Irish freedom. So it's an honor that Turlock is here with us. And most especially, I'd like to thank my brother Hibernians who are here today. They've been supportive of this event and other events that we do throughout the year, but none of these events would happen without the support of the AOH, specifically the Father John Murphy Division. Just as an aside, the Era Society is having an awards dinner that's happening on May 2nd. There'll be flyers that will be handed out later. But Fintan O'Toole, who wrote a compelling book called We Don't Know Ourselves, is going to be the award recipient. And that's going to be happening at 6 o'clock on May 2nd, which is a Thursday. So those of you who are interested in Irish history and Irish heritage, and in particular, a recent compelling book about Ireland from 1958 to the present. That was the year he was born, which is why he chose that date. That's going to be happening, coming up on the 2nd of May. So with that being said, just before we have the singing of the national anthems, I'd ask Maura Curran to come up and say a few words, please. Maura.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. I want to say a few words of gratitude to those who put this event together, but I won't relist all the names that John just went through. I just want to echo our gratitude as the Scituate Select Board to all of them, John and your committee, as well as our sister city, West Cork of Ireland committee. It really has evolved over the years, started back, I want to say, right before 2016, and to see the evolution and the passion for our Irish heritage, clearly very Irish, is just wonderful. And thank you to all of you for bringing all the history and the passion to Scituate to continue to educate not only all of us here, but our youth, and to really value that heritage and the creation of Scituate. And I'd like to welcome Sighle FitzGerald, our Consul General from Boston, from Ireland, here as well again. So welcome to you, Sighle. Thank you for joining us. And on behalf of the Select Board, annually we read a proclamation. So I'm going to read that on behalf of our board to commemorate this Easter Rising celebration. So whereas the Irish Republican Brotherhood, led by Professor McNeill, had arranged for a parade to be held on Easter Sunday to organize a rebellion, but when the parade was officially canceled, a few Irish decided to go ahead with the rising. And whereas in 1916, on the morning of Monday, April 24th, about 1,200 members of the Irish Volunteers and Irish Citizen Army mustered at several locations in central Dublin to occupy a number of buildings, selected because of their positions near barracks and major routes in the city. And whereas, despite great odds against them, these Irish patriots held out for about a week against the British. And whereas, after reinforcements arriving that week, about 1,600 rebels were facing almost 20,000 British soldiers. And whereas the 1916 Rising represented the first major demonstration of force since the United Irishmen Rising of 1798, and whereas the Rising led to increased popular support for Irish independence, now therefore the town of Scituate recognizes the 108th anniversary of the Easter Rising. Signed this day, the 21st day of April, 2024, on behalf of the Scituate Select Board, myself, Andrew Goodrich, Susan Harrison, Karen Canfield, and Karen Connolly. Congratulations.
Also, I've been remiss not to talk about the fact that for the second time, we're honored to have in the town of Scituate the Consul General FitzGerald, who has a special place in her heart, I think, already for the town of Scituate, and she brought with her the newest member of her staff, Bridget Fahey, and it really is extraordinary for somebody to come from Ireland. I know Father Joe Barty was here. He's from County Donegal. But to look down the street of a town in America and see the Irish and the American flags flying at a time other than St. Patrick's Day is rather extraordinary. So, and also I wanted to take a moment to recognize the presence of the AOH, the Mass State organizer of the AOH, Dick Wall, who's also been very supportive of the Father John Murphy division since we got started 30 years ago. With that being said, I'd like to ask Maureen if she could sing the national anthems, please.
The anthem of any country is an important song. It always seems that the verse that has the most to say is the verse that's never sung. So in that vein, I will sing what I know to be the call to the country. Shayiv Harda, here, my friends, a band of people willing to stand together, beginning of the Irish national anthem. Shayiv Harda,
At all
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our fight was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you very much, Maureen. Extraordinary. So today we're honored to have with us the new Consul General of Ireland, Sighle FitzGerald. Consul General FitzGerald covers all 6 of the New England states except for Connecticut, and it's an honor that she's come down here to participate in this commemoration again. So, Consul General FitzGerald.
Thank you so much, John. It's lovely to be here, and John has described me as the new Consul General. I don't know that I get away with that for much longer. But it's always a pleasure to come to Scituate, and it is and has, I think, become a very special place in my heart. And that's because of the dedication and the real sense of history that is here in this place, and the community that maintains that history. I want to recognise the work that you've done, John, and your brothers in the AOH, Mike Schilling, and all the members of the AOH. I see Brenda from the Scituate South Shore Heritage Trail, Maura. So many people in this community who really hold their Irish heritage very close and very firm, with great respect. And that's why I think it's important, as we reach the decade, or the end of the decade of centenary commemorations, it's really important to realise that reflecting on the past and understanding the significance and the complexity of the events of that particular decade can help us to forge a future for Ireland that is worthy of the sacrifice of all of those who fought and who died during Easter week a century ago. Commemoration is such an important statement of remembrance and of gratitude. And I can't think of a place that does it better than this lovely town of Scituate. I was here last October, I think, for the commemoration of the Brig St. John. And again, it was very evident that the people in this region hold the people of Ireland very close and remember the stories and keep the stories of their forefathers and their forebearers alive. And that's such an important thing to do. So I want to thank you all for your efforts here, because it really is quite extraordinary. I was talking about commemorations, and yesterday I was at the grave of Fanny Parnell in Mount. And I'm particularly delighted that we're going to have a discussion today about women in revolution, because I think that's a really, really important thing. My own family, my own grandmother was a member of Cumann and part of the reason that I'm named Sighle, or spelled the particular way it's spelled, is there was a very active woman in Cumann called Sheila Humphreys, And I think that was the inspiration for my naming. But I'm also very conscious that here in Scituate, there's a revolutionary woman in this very room, many of them actually, but one that I particularly want to call attention to today. She's received a few awards recently, and I know she'll receive many more, but it's Catherine Shannon, a really revolutionary. And when I came to Boston, I realised that Catherine had very quietly but very effectively been involved in peacemaking from very, very early on. At a time when the Women's Coalition didn't exist in Northern Ireland. It was Catherine who was absolutely instrumental in giving them support and in helping them on their way. It was Catherine who provided a safe space for political parties in Northern Ireland to come together. So when we talk about women in the revolution, I think it's very important that we recognise the great contribution that Catherine has made, and I really look forward to hearing from her and from the other Catherine Neal, who's here with us, and also our wonderful colleagues from Boston College, who I know are here today. Just to say a couple of words, it strikes me we can honour our past and we can take great pride in our cultural legacy. But it's also important that we look to shape our collective futures based on the principles that are in the 1916 proclamation. Those ideals of religious and civil liberty, justice, equality, active citizenship, and independence. For so many who fought and gave their lives, those principles endure today to inspire Irish people at home and around the globe. The proclamation itself is still so very relevant, and what I take out of it is that its whole aim is about inclusion. Its very first line, as you all know, is Irish men and Irish women. It talks about equal rights for everybody and equal opportunities. And so the values that it stands for are still true today, and they're the things that we're still trying to get all around the world. For it to be so relevant as a statement today proves how forward-thinking the people who wrote that are, and it's a great privilege to have Thomas MacDonagh's great-grandson here today. I suppose one of the things that strikes me about the proclamation is that it still challenges us today to do the hard work of moving words to real action. And the Irish government is building on the idea of a shared island, an island where we show respect for our past, but we also embrace the much harder work of reaching out and respecting each other. And so when we look back over what has been achieved in the last century, we see a country that has been transformed, an Irish state that has proved to the world that it can achieve great things when it's free to shape its own destiny. When I came to Scituate on my first visit last February, I think it was, John, I very much enjoyed walking around the town, and John at a point said to me, I want to bring you to see the proclamation. And in my own head, I sort of had an image of maybe a little sign, on a wall. I was not prepared for this incredible monument, looking out over the sea, looking out towards Ireland. I wasn't prepared to see the words of this proclamation writ large here, and I think it's a testimony to this wonderful town and a testimony to your heritage and your respect for your heritage. So thank you for the invitation, for being here today, and I look forward to spending the rest of the day here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. You're welcome to come back anytime. At this point, in previous years, we've usually had a series of speakers come up and talk, and of having different perspectives from different people I know Brenda O'Connor is the president of the South Shore Irish Heritage Trail, has spoken most years. Siobhan Hunter as the chair of the Scituate West Cork Sister City Group, Joan Moschino as state rep, and we had Congressman Keating here. But this year, we do have a different format, and Catherine Shannon has really been instrumental in crafting this and putting it together with the help of Christian DuPont from the Burns Library. So at this point, I'd ask Catherine to come on up, and the members of the panel come on up, please. And I'll give the microphone to Professor Shannon.
Thank you all for coming out this afternoon for the 108th anniversary of Easter Rising. This annual commemoration began in 2016, the centenary of Easter week, when the Plymouth Division, with the leadership of John Sullivan, who has his finger in almost every Irish pie in the South Shore, decided that it was time to have the Irish diaspora here in this area celebrate that incredible historical event that changed Irish history so fundamentally. And it was out of that initiative here in Scituate that the idea came about doing an annual commemoration and also having a memorial erected as a permanent reminder of the important values that the leaders in the Easter week wanted to bring to Ireland and to spread actually in the whole world. I particularly am grateful to Sighle for bringing out the idea that the proclamation is still a live document today, and that it contained aspirations that we really need to strive to live up to as we move forward in our complicated world here in 2024. And I remember the discussions about what kind of a memorial should go up, and there were, competing ideas. And I think at one point I suggested to John, well, let's do something that looks forward and not just backward. And having the proclamation was the way to go. So I really appreciate that observation, Sighle, and also your very nice and generous opponent. Now, the other thing I would say by way of introduction is that the sun coming out today is very symbolic. And as many of you might know, the sunburst is a frequent symbol on Irish national publications and so forth. So we're very, very lucky that we have the sun out today and we can go over and lay the wreath at the memorial in the sunshine. Now, back in 2019 at the outdoor commemoration, when I think it was 33 degrees with a wind at about 30 miles an hour, we had our ceremony, and I was the speaker that day, and I came down to the harbor and I looked at the program, and I was blown away by the fact that Mike Chilling had made the centerfold full of Irish women. And it gave me a great opening line, because it meant, this is where women really belong, in this kind of a centerfold and not the others. So that was a kind of prelude to today's program that is going to focus on women. It took us 5 years, but COVID interruptions are the excuse. But we are here today, and we're very, very privileged to have the these panelists with us to take a deeper dive into the role that women played in Easter week in 1916 and the Revolutionary period from 1919 to 21. It used to be thought that only about 77 women were involved in the Easter Rising, but that estimation has been corrected by all of the research that's been done in the Bureau of Military History and the pension records that show that at least 300 women were actively involved in Easter week, and of course hundreds more a few years later in the Anglo-Irish War, the Revolutionary War. And could I pay tribute to one of my great mentors and friends who was the pioneer of Irish women's history, Margaret McCurtain, who really challenged the historians to abandon their male-centered narrative of Irish history and begin to research and examine the roles of women. So to Margaret, we dedicate this session to you and your work and your wonderful memory. Now, we're really privileged to have three wonderful panelists with us today. Tiffany Thompson is a PhD student at Boston College, and it's not in the program, she didn't mention that, but Tiffany was the second recipient of the Jung Foundation and the American Committee for Irish Studies scholarship to go to Ireland to do her research on the experience of women in the early stages of the Northern Irish conflict. So we're very privileged to have Tiffany with us here today. We also have Christian DuPont over on my left. And Christian is the director of the Burns Library at Boston College, which of course is full of all kinds of Irish treasures that has been built up over the years. And he's going to talk about some of those items that are here on the table and also that are featured in the program book. And we have Catherine Neal here, who has Wexford roots and also Cork roots. And she is going to tell us about a woman in her family, her great-grandmother, who was so involved in the revolutionary years from 1919 to 1921. Now, just by way of kind of a quick introduction to pick up on some of the kind of introduction in the program book, it should be remembered that the women who turned out in 1916 didn't just kind of drop out of the blue down in the sky. There had been 3 decades of very important work by women in a variety of different areas. They more or less cut their political and activist teeth in a number of movements, going back to the Land League agitations of the 1880s and the 1890s, the suffragette movement in the first decade and a half of the 20th century before 1916, and the trade union movement, very, very important. Many of the women who involved there had experience in the trade union movement, both in Dublin as well as in Belfast. And then, of course, women associated with the Gaelic revival in the Gaelic League to promote the language, in the literary movement, the Abbey Theatre in the state, where they not only acted but wrote plays, and of course in poetry. So those movements were kind of precursors and enabled women to break out of a fairly rigid Victorian restricted gender roles. So that helped them to develop their sense of nationalism in the kind of way that the German philosopher Herder suggested, that nations must have their own language, their own folklore, and be educated in their history. And a lot of that was done in the decades before the Rising. So those are some of the things that I think are important to stress today and that our panelists will speak on. So I think we'll start off with Tiffany first, who is concerned to not just the famous women leaders like Countess Markovitz and Nurse O'Farrell, and talk about some other women who played a crucial role. So Tiffany, we'll start you off.
Thanks, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Catherine, and thank you for everyone for having us here today. I would like to talk a bit about some of my research that I've done as a graduate student at Boston College. So I'm lucky enough to go to BC, where we have the wonderful Burns Library, and I've used some of the archives there that we had on women who were involved in the Revolutionary period. And these are women who have perhaps been overlooked by history because it's not your Countess Markovitch or Maud Gonne, right? These exceptional women, but they are people who were on the ground doing the important work every single day to enable the revolution to continue. So some of the work that they did were things like fundraising. They ran safe houses. Some of them smuggled guns and money. One of them, Molly Woods, was very close to Michael Collins and Leah Mellows. So these very important, men who we hear about time and time again. And yet, I have seen Molly Woods referred to as his landlady, when in fact she was, smuggling things for him and taking dispatches in, right? Doing all of this really dangerous work that's been sort of overlooked by these very traditional gender roles we have for women, right? And so I think it's really important that we expand our understanding of who participated in the revolution to include more women who were doing these sort of everyday activities.
Tiffany, could you talk a little bit about the sources that you've been using and that women historians use, because they've been left out of the narrative? Where do we go to learn about the roles of women in these two different time periods?
Right, so a lot of archives, right, have focused on collecting, stuff from Michael Collins, Eamon de Valera, right, these really big, important men. We should absolutely, keep an archival record of what they've done, but that has come at the expense of sort of overlooking a lot of these women. And so the task of the historian then is to look back at, old sources that we've used and see where women have kind of sneakily been there the whole time. Sometimes it also means using sort of non-traditional sources. So something that's been really important for historians in the last few years is the Bureau of Military History's Oral History Archive. Right, so in the 50s, the Irish state funded this whole project to interview thousands of people about their experiences. And that's where we get a lot of these sort of everyday women, these members of Common Law, who sat down to talk about their involvement in the revolution. What I've found that's really interesting is some of them will go on for pages and pages about the men around them. And so I think there's this really interesting, the way that they construct their narratives sometimes almost downplays their own involvement, but as historians we can kind of read between the lines and see just how important that these women were.
Kathleen Clark is an example of that, and perhaps her narrative was influenced by the fact that she didn't think her husband Tom got enough credit, that the credit had gone too much to Eamon de Valera. And of course, he was so important because he was the conduit through we brought the American money from the Flandin Gale and John Du Bois. So I guess we can understand why she had that kind of approach to her memoirs. Okay, so thank you, Tiffany. And now we have Captain Neal with us, who is going to tell us about their own ancestors' involvement in the Anglo-Irish War, 1919 to 1921, and how she found out about that, and what it means to her to have knowledge of this story of her great-grandmother Lily's for long.
One Catherine to another Catherine, thank you.
Thank you everybody. It's so great to have the Ancient Order for Hibernian profile women like this, so I do want to start it with a thank you for that. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about my great-grandmother, Lillian Noble, who was an active member of Common Law in Cork during the War of Independence. And she was, just to give you a bit of context, she had 10 children, lived to 99, so I never got to meet her myself personally, but my siblings had. And we were raised very much so in our household with the memory of our great-grandparents. So my grandmother was a gun runner, and she was recognised for her role in that. I'll give a bit more of an explanation about that, but we grew up knowing about her history, and also my great-grandfather, who'd set up basically an Athena Erin, which was the youth branch of the IRA, with his best friend Terence McSweeney, Terry. And then also had gone on to become Lord Mayor of Cork. And the big connection, actually, before I ever got to Boston, the only person I was told about in America was JFK, and only because he'd come to Cork. So when he was given the freedom of the city in '63, both my great-grandparents got to meet him, and that was still their connection to public service, within Cork. And that's been a really kind of key theme in my life as well. So I've worked as a public servant now for over 10 years. And the idea of giving back and what that means to your community has definitely been a really important part of that. And I know from my mum in particular, who's very much about the role of women, she's always like, if I have something difficult to do, she's like, well, don't forget your grandmother was out and what she had to do for independence for Ireland and, for her idea of Irish freedom. And some of the things that I'm aware of, and through the folklore of my family that has come down to me, is her role in the gun running, and then also in hiding basically people on the run in Cork City. So they lived in South Main Street, so anyone who's familiar with Cork, it's one of our kind of main thoroughfares. And in a very female, very domesticated way, her way of basically getting guns across the city, she used both her pram and her washing line. So she had her buggy, she would take guns up from Cork City Centre up to FitzGerald's Park, and what she would do is she would wait until the child had gone to sleep, and then she would head off then, so she was less likely to be stopped and to be searched. But I mean, just to put that in context, I mean, you're not only she putting her own life at risk there, but like the life of her family as well. But in her opinion, that's what she was fighting for. It was for the freedom of her whole family as well within that. And the washing line was an interesting one because their house was targeted for raids continuously. They used to be connected to the house behind them because it's an urban house. She used to put the guns in pillowcases and up on a dolly and send it out on the line so even when the house was turned over, these would be hidden. So like a pretty ingenious way for women to use like domestic kind of work they're doing anyway in the fight for this. But I have been aware of her history for a long time, and I was definitely raised on that, but it's only in the past maybe like 15 years that I really started to kind of learn more about what she'd done. And it is an unfortunate thing that a lot of the records have been lost, and the story of women has been lost. And for me, it's the stories that have come through my family, which have been most important, and also I think it's the Department of Defence, her interview that she gave to get her service medal. There was very few service medals awarded, and even far fewer awarded to women, so she was very lucky very hardworking to have gotten that. And it was only in reading her testimony and the testimony of the people who said what she'd done in the cause of independence as well, that I was able to get a real sense of her commitment to it. So there's one line at the very end, and I'll pass it back to you then, but I remember at the very end of the interview, the last question is, and how long did you keep fighting for Irish, in this, how long were you fighting for? And she was like, until the very end. And I'm like, I feel that the sense of, the commitment and this kind of sense of purpose and what she's willing to do, and that's something that I definitely have, that I kind of bring with me in my perspective to public service to this day. Yeah, so it's a bit of an overview of my family.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and the story about the pram being the gunship, more or less, is interesting. It reminds me of Helena Maloney, the great Abbey actress, who combined her revolutionary activities with her professional acting career. And at one point, just prior to the Rising, she had an engagement in London for a play that she was doing, and then came back to Ireland with guns and ammunition in her suitcase. She was a famous person, so when she was on her way to the boat to take her back to Dublin, lo and behold, didn't a local British policeman offer to help carry her cases on the ship. So I suppose maybe he should be given a footnote in history for helping out. So, and the same kind of ingenious kind of methods were used by women in Northern Ireland in recent times, emphasizing the importance of not just fighting for their own individual concerns to be freer and for liberation, but also their families. And certainly that kind of viewpoint was there in women in Northern Ireland when they worked for peace, and for those who protested what they saw as the oppression of their society. So, and Tiffany is dying for that PhD thesis to be finished and learn what you found out about the experience of women in the North. Well, I suppose it's appropriate now that we bring a male into the story this afternoon, but it is a privilege to welcome Christian to Scituate. I've been waiting to do this, I think, for about a dozen years since you've been at Boston College. But Christian is the director of the Burns Library and does a fantastic job there in safeguarding the Irish treasures that are there. And he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the artifacts that he brought down today for you to view, and about what the Burns Library is doing to keep us all fully engaged in Ireland's story.
Thanks, Catherine. There's a bit of banter here between us, I think, but it's been 10 years since I've been at Boston College. 10 years, that's all right. And, but you're quite right, this is my first time here at Scituate. I'm a little embarrassed by that fact, but I'm here today because I've made it out. Thanks to John and Mike and others for the invitation, because I recognize how important Scituate is. And Sighle, you mentioned that in your remarks, how struck you are coming from Ireland and see the proclamation and the kind of gathering here today. I mean, this is, many of you come to many events at Burns Library in Boston College. And this is a bigger gathering than we have for most of them, I'd say, so it's really very good. I wanted to also, in addition to saying a few things about the artifacts we have on display, which we can look at after together, maybe some perspectives here. And surely, as I was going to play that remark as well, I'm invited here today more from my role in the Burns Library than my gender, but we could think about, this is always very important to do in history, I think, is to, when we look at a historical event, we want to study it with the evidence that we have at hand, the documents that survive, maybe the memories of family members have passed down. But there's also that bit of historical imagination where we have to say, now, if I had been there, where would I have been in all of this? The improbabilities of history, and particularly of the Easter Rising and what followed it, strikes me as somebody who's studied different periods of history in different cultures, as one of the most improbable things that could have happened. Right? You referred to earlier the many movements coming from the 19th century, the role that women played in those, Fanny Parnell, the Ladies Lambie, and then the Gaelic cultural revival, women involved in acting in the arts, the Eight Sisters come to mind in this as well. We do have some artifacts here of Maud Gonne. We've spoken a little about her. She was very much of the cultural revival initially, and was really, of that descent, an Anglo-Irish descent. And then she founded the Daughters of Ireland at Ninian, which was a nationalist movement. It was strident. They really protested the Queen Victoria's visit to Dublin and said we must boycott and abstain from this. So there was a very firm stance, but it was a peaceful movement after all. And it was really focused on training women and girls to become women and girls in society, and sort of traditional roles. So what's really remarkable about Consul is that it's a paramilitary organization. It was listed today, but it interestingly is listed by some governments, because it continues to exist today, as a terrorist organization, but others not, including the U.S. But certainly at its time, I mean, any organization that was trying to then take up arms, not just the women do this is extraordinary. I think so where did that exactly come from? It really seems to have come from themselves. They weren't modeling in any other country at that point. I mean, to think about how differently history could have turned out as well. I mean, in some ways, it's World War I that turned out, right? Because what was happening with the land league and James Redmond, they were going to reach a settlement probably on this, yeah? Right? And there would not have been an Easter Rising, you know? An Easter Rising, right, might have been called off. It wasn't a falsely circulated report, but there you go. And it was among those, you know, in Liberty Hall, you know, the women going to Jane Consul and saying, we pledged ourselves to this. Huh? You know, this is our proclamation, Irish men and Irish women. If we don't fight now, we're never going to fight. You know, this is not going to happen. But that was such a minority opinion. And then the taking up in arms. I mean, that's what seems to be such a remarkable thing. I mean, these women were hated largely, and why are we finding out maybe it's 300 more than 77? Well, think about how much they have to hide to do this, right? And they're being used, you know, as the mules to carry messages. So their identity, much more than the men's, could have to be kept secret and not compromised. And so, you know, what records would there be, and what stories would you tell afterward? And then we skip ahead, and I'll come around to my artifacts here in a minute, is to say, you know, after, I mean, the fact that the rising of the British actually hadn't shot the signatories that would the tide of public opinion have come around, you know? And then obviously the conscription in World War I in 1918. But then you come forward to the Irish War of Independence, the Civil War. So again, there was a moment when this worked out. Michael Collins was a hero in some way, right? Well, let's sue for peace. Let's have a treaty. We could work this out. We can have peace again. Because everybody wants us to go and have peace and to get along culturally with your neighbors. But you know, that idea to keep fighting on, to resist the treaty after this time, and then to take up arms again and fight against it, that's what's really remarkable. And how, you know, these women were violent for that. And no wonder they were put in prison. And probably many of their, you know, other country women would have wanted them to see them there, to leave them there. I mean, it strikes me as really remarkable. And so, you know, to say that you're a Consul member in the 1930s during the Free State, like a Maura Comerford, whose archives we have just recently acquired, and we have her niece or daughter-in-law by marriage is editor of memoirs. You know, she lived well into the 80s, in her 80s into the 1980s. What was her life like in the 1930s? Very isolated, very poor. Nobody wanted her. So that's why I think these stories don't come out. Nobody wanted to talk about them, you know, much less remember. And who would you tell them to anyway? So back to you, Catherine, and Margaret McCurtain, and others who realize, you know, in these recollections, as these generations were coming to an end, the daughters, it's the children of these women who were starting to tell the stories that they had heard, and others wanting to listen and to tell those stories. I mean, it didn't happen in the 1966 commemorations of the Rising. It's only happening now. And so that's where, coming briefly to the artifacts, when I came to Boston College in 2014, having, yes, I did a degree in philosophy at Notre Dame, so I have a bit of Irish background. My family background is not Irish at all, by any means. But, you know, coming into that momentum of 2016 and realizing how important, so that's where I'm looking at my colleague Kathleen Williams there, now retired as an Irish Studies librarian, worked on acquiring collections in our exhibits, so the Loretta Clark Murray collection, you see that nicely featured, and Mike, I mean, what a beautiful job with this program. Again, I mean, it's really tremendous. You've taken the images that I've sent you, put them in a context. You'll see some of the same objects here, others you can come to Burns Library to see. But that's an effort of a collector. Loretta Clark Murray was primarily, we continued to collect around it, of course, but Loretta was somebody who decided it was important for women's stories to be told. So she went to auctions, she went to family members, she just acquired things. And then we had that opportunity, because she was nearing the end of her life, like it was 2017 when she passed away. So making that available as a collection for us to acquire. So you remember Margaret? I remember Loretta. She was a carrot. Okay, I've talked on too long here.
And Tiffany for your commentary in terms of position in the 1930s. I remember seeing a TV interview of Laura Comerford, and it was extraordinary to hear what her experience was of being marginalized, and to the point that she was living in poverty, and her activities not given their due credit and acknowledgement. And of course, I suppose overseeing this was Amy Devalera, the leader who didn't want the women with him at Boland's Mills and wanted them to go home. So Deb had a very idealized version of what women's proper role was in society, and that certainly was reflected in many ways in his period as a politician. So, John, do we have time for any questions or comments from the audience? Yes.
If I might say something, I'm Torlock, Thomas's great-grandson. Thank you for putting so much attention on the woman. I don't know how much is known about my own great-grandmother and her sisters, the Gifford sisters. 4 out of the 6 of them were very much involved. Nellie, Cindy, Grace, probably the best known, and Muriel, my great-grandmother. But in particular, Grace was jailed in Kilmainham during the Civil War for her little drawings that she liked to do. I'd like to hear a bit more about, if you guys have information to offer, about the role of the women in the Civil War, and then post-Civil War, how, and I think a lot of this is, as you kind of alluded to, was to do with Deb. But during the Rising, War of Independence, and the Civil War, women were really on an equal status almost with the men. Post-Civil War, you saw a lot of those rights kind of evaporate out, the roles evaporate out, and it's only been the last couple of decades we've really started to see that come back, maybe starting with Mary Robinson even. So first of all, I'd like to hear a bit about that, but thank you so much for putting this focus back on the woman. I know there's an RTE documentary about a year ago on the role of the woman and the children after and all the rest of that. So I do see that information, that re-education starting to make its way out there, but I feel it's very important. So much so that my daughter's middle name is Gifford, as a nod to her great-grandmother and those really brave sisters.
And your great aunt Grace was very important in devoting her artistic talents to various publications that supported the national cause, and right to the end of her life remained committed to a Republican solution for Ireland.
My cousin Muriel, who's kind of the public face of the family and attends most of the commemoration, government, like official commemorations in Ireland, she remembers Grace very well from when she was young. My dad, I guess my grandfather and Grace had a bit of a falling out, so my dad only ever met her a few times. But she was pretty much destitute up towards fairly late. From what I understand, there's a family story about it. I guess it was Deb who really got her the widow's compensation, because there was, being married the night before he was executed. I don't know if it ever even officiated. There were a lot of issues around that.
I read somewhere that Grace's mother was interviewed by the press shortly after 1916, and her mother was not very enthusiastic about her activities and said she always was a difficult child.
There's actually a really lovely article.
John Lewis getting into good trouble.
Good trouble. Oh yeah. John Lewis, and he actually. My background, I worked in documentary television for a long period of time, about 10 years after I got out of school. I worked for a company called Blackside. They're the ones who produce Eyes on the Prize, which is a fairly well-known civil rights documentary series. Through that, I have met a number of those leaders of civil rights in SNCC, those kind of groups. And a lot of their efforts spoke really loudly to me and my heritage knowing the kind of civil rights my great-grandfather and his buddies were fighting for. So yeah, and even down to the point of some of those people who knew about Irish history, when they found out who my family was there was this weird connection. But, so yeah, the good kind of trouble is really something that rings true for me.
In one way, for people who want to dive a little bit deeper into the role of women, if you look at your program, there are a number of women who are listed there, and one of the quickest ways to find out about what they did was to go to the Dictionary of Irish Biography, which is online, where you can see some very short and good essays written by professional historians about the work of women and also men in the shaping of Ireland's history and so forth. And then for those who want a book that kind of introduces this subject in a very readable way, Margaret Ward's book, The Unmanageable Revolutionaries, was a very, very important book in opening up people's awareness of women's role in the national struggle from the time of the Land League days all the way into the 1920s. So that's your homework until next week. We'll give everybody a quiz then. So are there any other questions or comments?
Just a comment. I think the fact that St. Bridget is now a national holiday speaks volumes as to the power of Ireland. So that's a comment. We'll go on our second year, I think, of the national holiday. And I think that just there's a lot of underlying things that go into that happening. And of course, pre-patriarchal history in Ireland, and mythology and fairy tales and beautiful things, great things about women. And my grandfather was in the Civil War, and I'm sure his sisters were helping out as well. Thank you.
Catherine, just at one point to make, I think it's important, I think women weren't written out of Irish history. Their story was never told. And one of the things that the Irish government certainly tried to do...
I'm sorry, Sheila.
We need to hear
Thank you.
What I was saying is, I suppose it's not really a case of women having been written out of Irish history. They were never written into it. And there's the very famous photograph, Catherine and I were talking about this at Easter Rising, and there is a woman in that shot. The only thing that's visible are her shoes. So I think, and Kristen, you alluded to it as well, the commemorations in 1966, no reflection of the role of women. But there was a very, very conscious decision for the 100th anniversary by the Irish government that they would shine a light throughout the commemoration of the 1916 Rising on the role of women. And in a sense, I suppose we're at a period where we're writing them in now. But I think it's really, really important that that is done. So just to reflect on that as well. Thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah, Tricia.
I'll be long. Christian, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the artifacts that you have over there.
If you could tell us a little bit about the artifacts that you brought, so that we'll have, I would have more of a sense when I'm looking at them.
So let's do this. I will, as we close, because that's where I'll have a chance to come up and see things together. I'll do that then. I think we had another comment or question or comment from Dan.
This lady right here.
Yeah.
Hi, do I need the 30 years teaching high school English? My voice should carry.
Thank you so much. There are some of us in this room who have been waiting a very long time for this discussion. So thank you so much, all four of you. I want to rise for the common woman. There were many, many women whose name will never make any of the annals that you're talking about. But something happened at the kitchen table. Something happened tucking children in at night. Something happened culturally that eventually ended up with the blood sacrifice. And that's an extraordinary thing for a mother to give the message that it's important to fight. I don't know how we describe it in the culture, but it is something that was in the Irish culture. My grandmother had 3 men in combat, my father, her two sons. That idea that there's something worth the blood sacrifice, worth fighting for, worth dying for, is specific to different cultures. And I put it to you to write about it, to think about it. We have a pacifist religion in Ireland, and we have not been pacifists. And part of that happens through mother's milk. So that is part of the role of the common woman who sent her son and daughter out to fight. And I would like that to be explored in some way. I put that to you for the next generation, maybe. It's part of the role of women.
Anyways, thank you. I am Dick Wall. I'm the state organizer for Agent Order of Hibernians. I've been here numerous times and everything, and I am so proud of the Division 9 gentleman from Plymouth here. And we talk about women throughout our history and everything. There are actually plans to try and open an LAOH division here in Plymouth also. It is so important what you gentlemen are doing here with this and the Brick St. John and all that, to pass this on. I've spent 40 years in public education, secondary, elementary, secondary education. There is nothing in our history books about the Irish and how we got here and what we went through to get here. Christian, I'm dying to get into the Burns library there to see how it is. This is important because we are the ones that pass on our heritage, the stories. Christian mentioned the stories. That's how most of us got our education on where we came from and how we got here. Is the stories from our parents and grandparents and all, passed down from generation to generation. And it's important that we continue to pass it down, because you're not going to find it in any of the textbooks. When you get into college and everything, it's Catherine and Tiffany, you've got a great opportunity to do all the research and everything. That's fantastic. But our kids coming up are not getting a fraction of our, what went on. I mean, we know all about James Connolly and Bobby Sands and all that and everything. St. Bridget, by the way, is the patron saint of the LAOH, and she's their mainstay. So it's important that we continue with passing on the heritage of it. And again, gentlemen, what you do here in the Plymouth AOH is fantastic. I met these gentlemen back when I was state president, and I've loved coming down here all the time. I love the dedication. And it's not just one or two. There's a lot of them. And, same thing throughout the state. We honor John Boyle O'Reilly, Angora Moore, and all the different organizations. But you guys really take it to heart here, and I love it. Thank you very much for all that you've done for us.
Thanks. I appreciate and I really thank all of the committee and all of the people who made comments here today. And so I'm here just to talk about a poor, simple, my aunt, a poor, simple, middle of the country woman. To back up, they had a small house on the main, just at the foot of the Galtee Mountains in Tipperary. And it was a safe house during the War of Independence. And my aunt was a carrier for messages. So this particular night, I'm just going to, one incident. This particular night, in the middle of the night, they got word that there were two of the people who were on the run. They were in a little house close by, but that the Black and Tans were on their heels. So she had to get out of bed, put on a coat, whatever, and since they were on the upper side of the road, she had to crawl under the bridge on a little stream that was close by so that the black and tans would not be aware of her. And so she went down, got the folks, the two men, out of the bed and got them out safely. So now, since the bed was warm and the black and tans were right on her heels, she popped into the bed. And she was in bed for about 5 minutes when the black and tans came in, and they went immediately to the bedroom and hauled her out of the bed. And thus, you know, she did her little part in passing on messages and saving people. So.
May I just interject for a moment? Dick mentioned that my name is John Travers. I'm the membership chair of our division in Plymouth, and we're working very hard to form a ladies' division, and we're having an open house at our new quarters in Cottage Park on Saturday afternoon, June 22nd. You're all invited. We're going to have representatives there from the Ladies AOH State Board to give you more information on that, and we'll try to get information on Mr. Sullivan. I'm sure will be hanging posters on all the telephone poles down Scituate Center. So you're all invited. Keep that date in mind. It's June 22nd, male, female. You're all invited to come join us at Cottage Park. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. And we have one.
Okay, question right here. I just have a comment. I'm Elizabeth O'Farrell's niece.
Could you say that again?
I'm Elizabeth O'Farrell's niece. I knew her. She died in 1956. It was my grandmother's sister. My grandmother just had one son. I'm emotional. I can't help it, I'm very emotional. Also, that was my grandmother on my mother's side. My grandmother on my father's side was Great Gifford's lifelong friend. I don't think he realizes this. Her name was Kelly. But one incident that happened when what did they call them? Sorry? No, it wasn't the Black and Tan, it was in Dublin. My grandmother was, they used to come and raid her house. She ran a safe house. So, and she lived near the market, where the farmers would come in and sell their cattle and whatever they were selling. But she had two young men, very young, in the house with her. And she would say to them, listen, when they come to the house, what you're going to say is, you're up for the market for the day. And don't say anything else, and everything will be just fine. And that's what she did for a long time. But there was some, they were called, what were they called in Dublin? They were called I'm trying to think of the men, what they called them, the secret, No, they were like secret police that used to come. Anyway, they were on a bicycle outside her house. And my uncle, her son, told her about it. This man has been watching me, watching him go to school and watching the house. And she said, okay, I'll take care of that. And she did. They never saw him again. They saw him again. That was the story I was given. That was given by, things like that did. And this was just an ordinary woman. Things happened. But she was Grace Gifford's lifelong friend. When Grace Gifford got a pension from De Valera, which she did, she lived with my grandmother for a long time in Marino. I don't think you're aware of that, but she lived with my grandmother for a long time in Marino. And when she got her pension, I've done this here. When she got her pension, she said, okay. My grandmother's name was Mary Ann.
were going to Paris because they were both artists. So she took her for a week or two to Paris so that they could enjoy the art there. But she's remained with her they were friends forever. And Grace Gifford when Grace Gifford died, she lived off Nassau Street in one room by herself. And people did ignore her. They had no idea. She was a desperate woman. She was in a very bad way. My aunt, Elizabeth O'Farrell, would fill us in on everything that was going on in Dublin. And like I said, she died in 1956, so yes, I did know her. She was a beautiful woman, very proud. I guess that's all I have to tell you.
Any of our panelists have a last word that they want to say?
I know you've had a lot of comments here, and I want to say just one final thing. While the role of women were definitely about fighting and what we're talking about today, I would say women actually were very important as well in negotiating. And I think, we find this in Northern Ireland as well, and some of the work that you've seen. And I don't want that to be understated, I think, as well. My grandmother was not a politician. She wasn't elected as a politician, but she was known as someone who would broker a lot of deals as well afterwards, and was very much a part of forming the new state, particularly in Cork. But I think that it's important to remember women were very important in that role as well, and we continue to be so. Just wanted to make that as a final comment.
Well, that's very, very important in terms of the energy and the commitment that women in Northern Ireland have expended to bring peace to Northern Ireland and to forward that throughout the island of Ireland has been extraordinary. And again, that's something that was ignored for a long time after the Good Friday Agreement. The incredible work of the Women's Coalition in bringing to the fore the needs of victims would have been totally left out. The commitment to integrated education, the commitment to human rights, that would have been left out if it had been a totally male group of negotiators. It was quite interesting on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. They had a big conference at Queen's, and the male politicians at last were falling over themselves to recognize the role of the women and their importance in forging together that incredible document. A document that hasn't fulfilled all of the aspiration contained in it, but again contains the kind of values that people should be committed to, so that we can look forward to a new Ireland where every tradition and every group is recognized and has their equal rights. So that too, despite its flaws, despite the constructive ambiguity, can still serve as a guidepost for going forward. I think, John, are we out of time, and it's time to go over to... Catherine, do you want to I think I've talked enough.
And that's all for Catherine and for Catherine. We'll segue it. So we'll, as we converse and then go to the wreath laying, right? Trish invited me to say a few things about the artifacts on display, which again, Mike did a beautiful job in representing the program. So things to look at here, there are two pieces of jewelry. This again, actually all from Loretta's collection here. And Loretta was a jewelry collector. She collected many other things, but these are special pieces of jewelry. One is a brooch that's modeled on the Tara brooch, okay? So that Celtic tradition. It has the words inscribed on the top in brass, here in an era. So that's the organization, the Daughters of Ireland organization that Bob Gunn founded. And you'll see a photo of a young man who's actually wearing one of these, a Boy Scout. And then I can also show you a photo of the Inn and Heron, the Daughters of Ireland, a group photo. And this brooch was probably in that photo, all right? There were not many of them, all right? Then you also have By contrast here, the Kumanaman badge, okay, which is not a tower brooch, it's a rifle. Okay, so again, the contrasts between how women were expressing their nationalism and what they thought they needed to do for Ireland. Then we have also in rather pristine condition, I think it's a photocopy, but it's not. I don't know how it quite survived. It's in pristine condition, probably from 1914. It is the objects in the Constitution of Common Law. And on the back, there's a membership card, and it's blank, so there's only one, so somebody can fight over that, who gets to fill out. No, I'm just kidding with that. But this is how you became a member, right? And then lastly, we have two things here. And Margaret, you're using a phrase that's often used, doing my bit for Ireland, okay? This is a book that was written by Margaret Skinner, and we didn't talk about today at all. There's so many women we didn't talk about, and so many women that represent our collection. But Margaret Skinner was a Scotch birth, but really called Ireland was her home. And she was very closely involved in the Easter Rising week, right alongside Constance Marquis, we didn't really talk about either, okay? And she was shot 3 times crossing Stephen's Green, from the snipers on top of the Shelter Hotel. And like on Markowitz, had to leave Ireland after this, after the Rising, and suddenly the men were executed. And so she, along with Nora Connolly, Anna Scuffington mainly, traveled to the United States here to help raise awareness, raise funding for the ongoing nationalist cause. And so this book, Doing My Bit for Ireland, published in 1917. Now, this is even a very special copy. It's the one that Kathleen Clark formed for her library, from some of Tom's books, hers, and coming down to us. And then, even more remarkably, this came from a Webb's collection, there is a handwritten, it looks kind of like a diary journal. It's a copy of Margaret Skinner's Easter week recollections, many of which are used in the book, but not all of them. So, and maybe used on a lecture tour, because she was, again, hardly here. So a couple of objects, again, many things more in our collections in Burns Library. You're all very welcome. We will let anybody in. So, and many of you have been already. So I'll be here with them and can help you to look at them a bit more. Okay? Thank you. What's next, John?
Thank you very much, Kristen. I'd like to, first of all, thank the panel for the extraordinary insights and perspective. I also wanted to recognize Kathleen Williams, the president of the Era Society. Chair, excuse me. And also Ian Connolly-Tolkoff, president of the Era Society Charitable Lodge. Sorry, transposition. Both of which have been extraordinary supporters of this event. And as I was listening, I could not help but think of a great expression. You never put your foot in the same stream twice. To be here today, to listen to these stories, this is a relatively small group of people, but just those histories, just those stories, we're all going to remember. And it really is rather incredible to think of the histories of all of us of Irish ancestry and what our predecessors went through, particularly those who helped the fight for Irish independence. So those of you who have shared your stories, thank you so much, because all of us who heard will take that with us forever. So we're very, very grateful to all of you who spoke into the microphone and shared, because now we are going to remember that a lot of ordinary people did extraordinary things. So.